Welcome back to CEEN Caribbean News. Time now for Indepth. After clamoring for a no-confidence motion for 2 years, which still has not happened, and pressuring the Dr. Denzel Douglas-led government to call general elections, at least one wish of the combined opposition of St. Kitts and Nevis has been granted. Prime Minister of St. Kitts and Nevis, Dr. Denzel Douglas, named February 16, 2015, as the date citizens will head to the polls to install a new government. The announcement came less than 2 weeks after the Prime Minister dissolved Parliament, shortly after getting approval for the proclamation of boundary changes on the islands. What are the opposition's plans heading into the elections, and what happens whether or not they earn power? We discuss these and more with our guest, leader of the federal opposition of St. Kitts and Nevis, Mr. Mark Brantley. Welcome to Indepth, Mr. Brantley.
Thank you so much for having me. Good evening to you and to your many listeners in Jamaica and throughout the world.
Thank you very much. Now, is the opposition satisfied with elections being called?
We are very satisfied with elections being called, but perhaps in your introduction, there is a bit of information that is also important, and that is that the Prime Minister, having soldiered on with the minority and having refused to have the motion of no confidence called for over 2 years, has insisted on changing boundaries in what we think is a rank attempt at gerrymandering. And so, on the very day that he dissolved Parliament on the 16th of January, he rushed into Parliament within 15 minutes of the Boundaries Commission submitting a report. And without permitting any debate on the resolution, Parliament was convened and everything was done extraordinarily quickly. He then came out and dissolved Parliament and proclaimed that new boundaries were in effect. We had been in the court seeking an injunction to stop these new boundaries because we felt that all the process and processes set out in the Constitution had been violated. The court did grant an injunction to us, but the Prime Minister and his team then argued that the injunction was too late, and that by rushing the matter through Parliament, the matter is now, there's an ouster clause in the Constitution, and therefore the court could not inquire into the matter. We have been arguing that point. The trial judge agreed with them. The Court of Appeal, however, has issued an injunction to stop the new boundaries from going into effect. And so the country now is in a state of flux because we have a nomination day declared for the 6th of February and an election day of the 16th of February. But the circumstances are that the Prime Minister is insisting that only new boundaries exist. The Court of Appeal has indicated that the old boundaries must continue until such time as the court has an opportunity to deal substantively with matter. The matter, we are now told, is set down for the 4th of February, and as a consequence, we are, even as I speak to you, unclear as to what boundaries we will go to the polls on. So there's mass confusion existing here in St. Kitts and Nevis. And so whilst we welcome an election, we would have wanted to be clear that an election ought to occur on the constitutional boundaries, that is, the boundaries that existed prior to this fast that purported to be a sitting of Parliament on the 16th of January.
Now, this case regarding the boundary change is not the only one that was brought against the government by the combined opposition. What happens to these cases now, including the no-confidence motion?
Well, interestingly enough, we brought the case in the court, asking the court to compel the motion of no confidence, compel the Parliament, in effect, to hear the motion of no confidence on the basis that our constitutional right to have it heard was being violated. The trial judge agreed with us, and the government appealed. But even before that happened, the Speaker indicated that he could not table the motion because we had filed this case. Bearing in mind, we filed that case some 3 months after we had filed the motion, and all of our agitation to have that motion heard were rebuffed by the Speaker. We filed a case then in desperation 3 months later. He then wrote to say that having filed the case, the matter of sub judice, he could not hear the motion. Promptly thereafter, I withdrew the case from the court. I filed a notice of discontinuance. The Speaker then indicated that he wanted the case to proceed in court, and then used his own efforts in court as a basis for saying that the matter was before the court and he could not call the motion. The matter then proceeded to the court. We won. Indeed, the High Court judge indicated in clear terms that the matter was not and could not prevent the motion from being proceeded upon in Parliament. And he indicated that clearly A prime minister's legitimacy depends on him commanding a majority of support of elected parliamentarians. And in this case, Prime Minister Douglas has, for now over 2 years, not had the support of an elected majority. But that elected majority lies with me in opposition. And so he has, through artifice, held on to office for the past 2 years. It is unprecedented in the Caribbean, indeed unprecedented in the Commonwealth, that we could have any prime minister functioning in such a manner. And on top of that, to add insult to injury, he has now insisted that he wants to change boundaries. And so this is where we now are in terms of St. Kitts and Nevis, where we feel that a horse and buggy has been driven through our constitution, and all norms of parliamentary democracy, as known to the Commonwealth, have been terribly violated. And I should say, since I'm on radio in Jamaica, that we in St. Kitts and Nevis have lamented openly that we have felt let down by the region. I want to thank you and your station in particular, because this is not the first time that you have called me on this issue. But CARICOM has been silent, the OECS has been silent, our regional partners have been silent, and we are perplexed as to why these attacks on democracy in St. Kitts and Nevis have not provoked the wrath of the Prime Minister of Jamaica or the Prime Ministers throughout the region. And we would hope that if it were that these undemocratic practices were seeking to take root in Jamaica, that the rest of the region would look on and condemn where necessary. But it appears that in St. Kitts and Nevis, perhaps we are small, perhaps some may see us as insignificant, but of course undemocratic practices in any part of our region weakens the entire region. And any march to dictatorship in our region is a reflection and a poor reflection on us all. CARICOM, the OECS, and these regional bodies all have a mandate for good governance, democratic principles, and we are perplexed, to put it mildly, as to how the situation in St. Kitts and Nevis has been allowed to fester for this period of time. The most recent example of this Prime Minister being under pressure, and now he's unsure as to whether these new boundaries that he has sought to gerrymander will work because of the intervention of the Court of Appeal. The latest effort on the political rostrum is he told his supporters that we're now moving into new territory, we're going to capture new territory, and all man dead, and who not dead is going to be badly wounded. Now, what on earth is that supposed to mean?
Now, Dr. Mr. Brantley,
yes,
there is currently a controversy involving Nigerian students on the island and their right to vote. Why does the opposition object to this?
I don't think there's any controversy. The basic principle is that under our electoral laws, Commonwealth citizens resident in our country have a right to vote if they've been resident for 12 months. That is what our law says. The issue of students, I don't want to focus on Nigerian students because they're students from other parts of the Commonwealth who are at these offshore medical universities here. But the issue of students, that they're not resident here in the context of how the law defines residency, they actually are here on a visa. And so our argument has been that because they are in a particular class category of person in the country, they do not qualify as someone ordinarily resident here, as say it would be if somebody was here to work or to live, married, as the case may be. So that has been a legal argument that has been made. What has sparked some discussion is some unknown caller, we have no idea who this person is, purported to call into one of the radio stations, threatening violence against Nigerians if they were to try to vote in an election. We have condemned that because we have made it very clear that insofar as we are concerned, anyone lawfully entitled to vote ought to vote. They ought to be able to exercise their franchise freely and fairly. And that is the bedrock principle on which we stand. But barring that, there is no controversy so far as I'm aware, save and except that we disagree that people who are here as students and on a student visa, which gives them a special classification that they qualify as being ordinarily resident for purposes of exercising a franchise in St. Kitts and Nevis.
All right. Now, are there any plans to separate the combined opposition before or after the elections?
Separate them?
Yes.
Well, no.
The team unity.
we have indicated that team unity is solid as a rock. Indeed, we just had a signing of a treaty of understanding as between the various parties in the heart of Charlestown. That is in Nevis. We were able to put several thousand people on the streets in Charlestown in quite an historic occasion. The reality is that unity, bringing together different political parties under a single umbrella with a single ethos, a single effort, it represents a paradigm shift in governance, not just for St. Kitts and Nevis, but indeed for the region, because we are now saying that this is a bridge, if you will, an effort to get beyond past hurts and difficulties that have really hampered the development of St. Kitts and Nevis, and for us now to bring into being a brand new form of governance that is consultative rather than confrontational.
All right, now what are some of the plans that will be carried out if the opposition becomes the government?
Well, not if. I want you to use the language of when.
When?
Because we're very confident that we will prevail come February 16th. And indeed, just before I mention plans, I ought to let you and your listeners know that because of the Court of Appeal's intervention on these boundaries, we are now hearing suggestions from Dr. Douglas and his team that elections may actually be delayed. So we are now seeing an effort to suggest that if they don't get the boundaries that they want, that might cause them to delay elections beyond the date that has already been fixed. So the situation here is quite volatile in that regard. But in terms of what we plan to do, what we think we will be able to implement very quickly, St. Kitts and Nevis have always had a rancorous relationship. We think we can fix that because we now have the parties at the table in a unified way that will bring that type of understanding and allow us to fix the relationship between St. Kitts and Nevis. We have pledged and committed to removing the dreaded VAT on food because we feel that it is unfortunate that even the poorest among us have to pay VAT on basic necessities such as food that they require. We have said we will remove VAT on medicine. We think that it is unfortunate that our people have to pay VAT on medicine. We shall remove VAT on funeral services because, as we have said here time and time again, on the Douglas, even the dead are not free from taxation. And we are saying that that ought not now to be the case. We have proposed a comprehensive land policy. We have proposed a comprehensive policy for assistance for students to go overseas, and a renewed emphasis in terms of education, renewed emphasis in terms of agriculture, have proposed a more equitable relationship between St. Kitts and Nevis, including a more equitable sharing of national resources. It might be of interest to your listeners, for example, to know that between 2006 and 2013, the Douglas administration collected just about 1 billion EC dollars, which is about 400 million US dollars, in passport processing fees from our Citizenship by Investment program and in international aid, especially from the European Union.
All right, we'll have to leave it there, Mr. Brantley. And we wish you and the combined opposition all the best for the elections.
Well, I hope the next time I speak to you, I shall be speaking to you as a minister in the federal administration.
All right, thank you. That was Mark Brantley, leader of the federal opposition in St. Kitts and Nevis. Stay tuned. Sports is next.